Hi, this is Baruti Call Alexander, and I'm here with my brother, Darrly Malloy. We are talking about going from renting to owning. Very important, very strong in this economy. Anytime you can build a legacy, owning your property, we all have to pay for a place to stay, and it's very important if we can own our property. I turn it over to my friend, Darrly Malloy.
Carl, I want to thank you for the invite to be on the show with you. I think it's an excellent opportunity to speak to the people and talk about home ownership. I tell you what's interesting for me, Carl, when you think about when we first titled the show and we would talk about going from renting to owning, the struggle. And I said, no, let's not do the struggle, because the struggle is kind of buying into what's going on. But I think if we talk about the challenge, because if the challenge challenges us to do better, that is
I
not a
wanted
struggle.
to cut in and just use the correct wording. I said hard times.
Hard times. Okay, yeah, right. And I changed it from hard times to challenging times, so that it can be a challenge to us. And based on it being a challenge, we have the opportunity to overcome the challenge. So I just think that it's a lot of it is based on the mindset of people. You know, I think about if we go, sometimes I like to, I've done a class or a book called Possessing the Land, Biblical Perspectives to Successful Home Ownership. And in that book, I talk about Adam and Eve being evicted from the Garden of Eden. And so if we think about, as a part of our being is eviction, it's foreclosure. And so there's a challenge in home ownership for everybody. Just from the beginning, we got Adam and Eve when they talked about Jesus not having a place to lay his head. So they're in our being, there's a challenge. So we need to overcome that challenge and prepare for home ownership. Through home ownership, we can leave a legacy for our children's children and create wealth. And want to talk about that today. Once again, want to thank you, Carl, for inviting me and the Brighter Light Source to be a part of this presentation. And it's a presentation and a conversation. So if anybody has a question, chime in with your questions. We're here to answer questions. I've actually been in the real estate business for a good number of years. Sometimes I tell people I was born in real estate, and it seems like that sometimes when you think about all the things I've done in real estate, from cutting.
May I ask, sir, your father started Renaissance, is that true?
He didn't start Renaissance, he started Malloy Property Management.
Okay.
Or actually, it was Malloy and Associates when he started it. And so we had Malloy and Associates, which was a construction and property management company. Upon his passing, I changed it to Malloy Property Management and Renaissance Realty Group, where I kind of took the company and moved into sales and not just doing property management and investments. And have done that now since the 80s and have been at it for a while. Recently relocated from Houston to the Dallas area, up in the Forney area. And so one thing about real estate is local. So a lot of what I'm seeing here in Forney or the Dallas area is different than what's happening in Houston or what's happening around the country right now. And it's amazing. I had a conversation with another realtor a couple of weeks ago. The guy, he's from India. And we just talked about world economics and what's going on in real estate around the world. So in a lot of situations, we're not here in America by ourselves thinking about recessions and appreciation and interest rates and all those kinds of things. That's happening all over the world. So it's not a Republican, Democrat situation. It's world economics. I mean, we have to think about Ukraine and Russia. And, you know, when you really do the research on Ukraine, you start understanding that Ukraine is in the top 5 of oil and gas, of wheat and foods. So to have a war going on there really affects the world economy. You know, if Putin last week or earlier this week decided that he's going to shut off the gas line going to Europe, and just imagine what that's going to do. But let me stay on track, Carl. Let me get to the PowerPoint presentation. Once again, Darrly Malloy with DOS, real estate broker associate with DOS, have been in the business for a great number of years. Here to share some of my research and some of my feelings about the current real estate market and how we can move from renting to owning and overcome that challenge.
Okay, I'll go to the PowerPoint presentation at this time.
Excellent. I'm gonna step away right quick. I'll be right back. All right.
Okay, I have to say, I have to find that. Give me a second. I'm gonna find it. In live presentations, sometimes it happens like this. I apologize, but I am going to find that right now. I got to go back to the email. Let me do that. We thank you for joining us on Facebook. And if you have a comment on Facebook, please let us know and we will answer your questions. And there it is right there, Mr. Darrell. And I'll come back to my screen. I apologize for that.
That's all right. No, like I said, it's just a pleasure to work with you. I know we had a little challenge here as far as the PowerPoint presentation was concerned, but we got it done. So that shows where we are. Title of the session tonight, Going from Renting to Owning in Challenging Times with Darrly Malloy. Hosted by Carl Baruti, Carl Alexander, and Brighter Light. I'm Darrly Malloy, broker, realtor, a GRI, that's what they call a Graduate Realtor Institute. I've attended there. I also have a senior real estate specialist designation, which is a designation to help people over 50 to right size, either for themselves, for their parents, working with seniors as they age and have the right size in housing. I thought that was something appropriate for me to do as I aged. And then as I work with parents and even working with millennials to work with their parents in the right sizing of their home ownership. So from there, we roll into the challenge. Because I think right now, you know, more than hard times, we got some challenging times out there. We got a lot of uncertainties out there. We don't know if it's a recession, if it's inflation, if it's a market correction, home value appreciation, interest rates, supply chain interruptions, supply demand, credit savings. Those are the challenges. And through the presentation, you'll see that we will answer all of those to figure out what's really going on in the marketplace. So did you know is my next section there. So did you know that right now, 2/3 of all Americans are living paycheck to paycheck? Did you know that 48% of individuals making over $100,000 a year are living paycheck to paycheck? Right.
That is big, right? You said
these
48% of people making even over 100,000.
100,000 a year living paycheck to paycheck. Because you know what I realized through this research, we've had issues for years. It's just catching up with us in the public's eye. And that's not any race, anything like that, but that's just economics and how we live as people in America right now. So 48% of individuals making over 100,000 a year are living paycheck to paycheck. Did you know that 2 years ago, the US home ownership rate soared to the highest in the past 12 years, just 2 years ago. So right before the pandemic, we had like the highest rate of home ownership. Of course, we start to understand that they lowered interest rates to motivate the economy because of the pandemic. So did you know the home ownership rate jumped to 67.9%, the highest since 2008 in the 2020 census? So if you could only imagine that as an average across America, 68% of all people own their homes. 32% don't own their homes or they're renting. Then if we look at, let's say from a Black home ownership standpoint, Did you know that the home ownership rate of Black Americans rose? Can you imagine this? It went up to 47%, the highest since 2008, from 44% in the 2020 census report. A year ago, in 2019, the rate of Black families was the lowest ever recorded. 2019, the lowest home ownership ever recorded for African Americans was in 2019. So we can sit here in 2022 and say it's a challenge to be a homeowner, but it's been a challenge. And we've only, based on the interest rates moving a little bit, is exposing that challenge that in some areas we're just not prepared. So now let's keep going. Did you know that the rate for Hispanics in home ownership increased to 51.4%, the highest in data going back to 1994, from 48% in the previous census. So just imagine now, our home ownership rate went down, the Hispanic home ownership rate went up. Now, once again, national numbers, national averages, it could be different in the various locales. An amazing story is here in Dallas, here in Forney, Kaufman County, where I'm located. We have one of the highest percentages of African-American homeownership in the country. Here in the Forney area, we have a 63% homeownership rate, which from talking to the national presenters of this information, they're like, wow, how does that happen? And they talked about the quality of the people that live here. They talked about the credit of the people that live here. They talked about the percentage of home ownership. And when you think about the numbers here, I mean, it's a suburb of Dallas, 22 miles outside of Dallas, but the quality of life here and the people that are living here, that are moving here, home ownership is a major factor here in this area. And it can, like I said,
ask a question.
Go right ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna just break it down. You said Hispanics are rising, Blacks are not rising as much or even declining. Would you say that's possibly more family related, that they will work with each other, help each other, and even stay in the same homes, kind of pooling resources, and we're not prone to do that as much anymore?
Excellent observation, Carl. Going back to my construction days, and had a lot of guys that worked with me that were Hispanic, and going around picking them up to go to work in the morning. And it was amazing to see how many people would come out of one house to go to work. And I started asking them questions about how they were living. And they talked about all living together, all sharing space, all saving their money, all sending money back to Mexico, or doing various things. And it was like, wow. It's like all sleeping on the floor. I mean, it was a lifestyle that I wasn't accustomed to, but that was how they made it, and that was how they increased their lifestyles. Then I once had some clients from Vietnam, and these guys talked about coming to America, not even being able to speak English when they got to America. They were college age when they got here. They learned English in college at Texas A&M. I was like, how do you go to college and learn English? And they came out of Texas A&M as computer engineers. And this one brother talked about how at one point they couldn't afford to both go to college. So one of them worked while the other went to college. And then when he finished his degree, he worked while the other went to college. And then eventually one bought a house while the other lived with him. And then the other one eventually bought a house. And it was just an amazing story just to watch how they shared time, shared their income, shared their housing, so that they both could, let's say, pull up by their bootstraps, whatever you want to say, just go to the next level. And so we have to look at that as being a creative way of learning to increase our income, to increase our savings, to increase our assets, to create wealth and leave a legacy for our children's children. Did you know?
That story, if I may say, is very important. And what our theme is, going from renting to owning, that could have some impact on that. And that's very important. That's a good story.
I mean, it's lifestyles. You know, a lot of times, so many things are based on lifestyles that if we change our lifestyles, there's a huge difference we can make in our lives as a community. You know, it's amazing. In fact, I'm gonna go back to a quote. I didn't share this with you guys, but I have a quote from W.B. Du Bois. He said, "To be a poor man is hard, but to be a poor race in a land full of dollars is the very bottom of hardship." So, and just imagine how, you know, that quote is years and years and decades old, but it still applies today. So let's go back here. Did you know, according to the 2011 American Housing Survey, the median year in which homes were built was 1974. So one thing that's going on right now in America is our housing stock is aging. The average house in America right now was built in 1974. So with that in mind, we have to understand that that plays into the inflation, the recession, the interest rates, the limited availability of housing, because houses are aging, houses are being torn down, houses are being rebuilt, and there's limited housing available. Then we have to look at what happened in 08, 09 through 07 through 09, the mortgage crisis. And at that time and place, a lot of builders stopped building for a while. So then we got further behind in housing stock. So we got to understand it's a supply and demand. Sure, you know, we know about the bidding on houses, not winning the bids, and how there's so many people looking for the same houses, same price houses. You know, something today came out and said that listings are increasing and staying on the market longer for houses over 250,000. But a house under 250,000 does not stay on the market long, and it still might have bids that are over the asking price. And we just have to understand that the way the market is set up now, what we would consider affordable housing has almost gone out the window. We have to understand that your big time investors from Wall Street are buying all the houses up kind of 250 and below to remodel those, fix those up, put them back on the market, flipping those, and making it even tough for small investors. So just understanding that. So then, did you know that inflation is at a 40-year high? Inflation hasn't been this high in 40 years. And in order to combat inflation, the federal government is raising interest rates. Now, they're not necessarily just raising interest rates on housing, but interest rates as a whole. In fact, what's interesting is yesterday, the rates were raised, but today, mortgage rates actually dropped. So one thing that happens, which is very interesting with the economy, with the media, just understanding the news reports, is that interest rates as a whole almost have to equate to the inflation number. And the inflation number supposedly is up to about, they were saying 7.7, now it's up to almost 9. So interest rates might have to go as high as 9. But once they get to that point, to stimulate the economy once again, they'll drop interest rates to stimulate the economy, get people to start buying again. Did you know that the long-term average mortgage rate is just under 8%? So now this becomes very interesting, Carl, because you know right now you have millennials that are buying houses that have never seen rates above 3, 4, 5%, and they think rates are just high. But if you go back into the 70s and average out interest rates from the 70s until now, 7.7, almost 8% is the average interest rate. So in actuality, even at 5.5, 6 right now, rates are still low compared to the average. So 7 points. Go ahead.
Sir, finish that point.
So 7.7 is the average interest rate and has been the interest rate since 1971. You know, I tell people that I'm not necessarily proud of it, but it happened. I sold the house to my mother back when in the 80s, and it was the market. She had an 18% interest rate. but that was the going rate. Now, she didn't live in that house long because of the interest rate, probably, but that was the going rate. And so we have to understand that interest rates are volatile. They go up and down. And the economy drives those interest rates. Go ahead, Carl.
2 questions. You said back in the day, you sold mom a home for 18% rate, but then now the rate is under 8%. What is I mean, I know it fluctuates, but that's a big change. Why is that? And then I have another question.
Well, of course, like I said, that would have been in the 80s. So that was almost 40 years ago. And over that time period, in fact, at the next slide,
Okay.
I think historical rates.
Okay.
So there you can see where, like I said, around that 80 point is where the rates went way up in the 80s. And just think about it. That was the oil embargo time. You remember those days, Carl, where
we were at the gas station,
at
everybody was trying to
getting
and
gas.
the gas was maybe $1 or something. And we said that was too much back then.
Right. I mean, that was like, in high school, the highlight of my day was get to drive the parents' cars up to Chevron and get in line, and we all be in line together just to get the $1 gas, 99-cent gas. So that was 18% interest rates in those days. And then after that, we see where the rates dropped, and we see where the average over the years has been 7.7. We can see, it's amazing to look at history and what goes on in history that affects interest rates, world economics. We talked about the oil embargo. We can talk about the war in Iran and different things that went on. And now we can talk about Russia and Ukraine and how all those things affect us locally, even though in some instances, it's not happening here in America, but it affects our economy.
It's still not as clear in understanding about these interest rates. Now, the companies that set the interest rate, first of all, the Fed sets the interest rate, and then the companies have some wiggle room to be able to get close or higher than that rate. And what determines that? Why is a rate set at a certain point? We know it's factors going on, but what makes somebody sit down and say, okay, this is a good rate for us to make a profit?
So it goes back once again to Wall Street, and it becomes a big mortgage-backed securities per se, and where they pool the home loans together and they sell the home loans and the interest rates to institutional buyers or institutional investors, your insurance companies, your major building companies, if you look at the various companies that are buying things on Wall Street, that are making investments, that are controlling what goes on, controlling interest rates, because it's kind of one of those, what is the market willing to bear?
If I may say, I'm trying to understand and make this clear so that I can understand and our audience can understand. Okay, you got a developer. He says he wants to start a neighborhood. He has the money. He invests 30 houses. He got 30 houses that he's building. Okay, how does he set, and he's going to sell them with his own little company. How does he set the rate at what they're going to be sold for?
It's just like selling potato chips. It's based on his cost. And how much does the money cost for him to produce the product? That determines the cost for him to sell the product. And then it's determined based on who the buyers are going to finance the product. And
okay,
then
but let me ask
so it's based on cost. How much does it cost me to loan the money to you so I can have what they call a spread between what I sell it for and how much money I make? So it's all about kind of the highest and best buyer and how much the big boys are willing to pay, and it's passed down to the individual buyers of houses, lots.
Okay.
So that even with that in mind, big builders probably make more money than, because I can afford to buy more than you can. So it's supply and demand. I'm buying more land than you are. I'm building more houses than you are. So because of that, I got discounts. Where you on the other side don't have the discounts, and you have to pass your cost on. I pass my cost on, but my cost is lower. Then because I got you have 30 houses, I have 300 houses. Then when I go to a bank for financing for those 300 houses, I'm buying more volume interest than you are. So the interest that I'm selling my houses for versus the person selling 30 houses for is lower.
So
So it's all supply and demand.
let me explore that volume interest. So I got 300 homes, and I'm gonna get uh, let's say 8% off of each one of those. Where the other person got 30 homes, they got to even set a rate higher so they can get their money. Is that clear? Is that right?
Well, yes and no, because the person setting the actual rate at that point, let's say, for example, good point. If that builder owns a mortgage company, then they start packaging it together. Okay, so we got 300 houses that we're building. We got our own mortgage company is going to finance these 300 houses, and now we can control the interest rates.
So they
Where
don't have to go to the bank.
they don't, I mean, yes, unless they got their own cash money, they have to go to the bank. So, like I said, everything is sold. So I sell the houses, you buy the house, then we turn around, we sell the loans to someone else. Then they package the loans and sell it even to someone bigger. And then they divide it up and sell it to mutual funds. But then we turn around, we buy our own mortgages back in a mutual fund.
Very
It's a
interesting.
complicated game.
Yes, it is. Very
And
much so. And all of the costs are passed down to the little guy who's just trying to buy his home. And without all of those little pieces, maybe it'd be a little bit more affordable. But
right.
already, when you got interest that you're paying for 30 years, you know that you're going to be paying a nice little chunk of change. If the house is, let's say, 175,000, you're going to at least pay another 25,000, if not more, over the life of the loan. So,
Let's make the numbers
from my
simple, Carl.
they're going to make theirs. Yes, sir.
Right. So make the numbers simple. If the house is $100,000 and you have interest accumulating over a 30-year period, you're going to almost pay $200,000 in interest over 30 years.
So you're going to pay double the amount of the home?
Double the amount of the home in interest.
Whoa.
For almost the
And
first.
what rate is that you're going to pay double, or is that kind of standard?
I mean, it's not necessarily standard, and that's the guesstimate on my end, but it's very close to real numbers. So let's say, for example, if you make principal and interest payments, or let's not, before you can go there, one of the tax benefits of buying a house is the mortgage interest deduction. Now, this becomes very interesting because from a IRS standpoint, you can write off your mortgage interest deduction. Now, usually when you buy a house, the first 5 to 7 years is all interest. So that means you can buy a house, you actually write off your monthly payment as mortgage interest, and they'll give you a statement that shows how much you're paying for the first 5 to 7 years.
Hey,
And
Darryl,
yes.
I have a question from Facebook. Teresa
Okay.
Hawkins Spates. She
Okay.
asks, doesn't our credit affect our rate as well with loans?
Our credit definitely affects our rate. So whatever the standard rate is, your income, your credit scores, your credit history, how much money you had to put down, all of that affects your interest rate. Very good question. In fact, we'll get deeper in that later on because, as I was saying earlier, this challenge didn't just start in 2022. This challenge has been going on for years, and it's just being exposed now because prices of houses are going up. and the pricing of interest rates are going up. But it's been an issue forever. You know, the next page, we talk about the recession, which is interesting. The words that the government uses, a lot of this is confusion. Sometimes they don't know, and sometimes they're trying to control the narrative themselves. So they're saying if we have 2 quarters in a row that decrease by double-digit numbers, that means we have a recession. But right now, this just came out, and they're trying to say, well, it's not really a decline in the second quarter this time, and so it's not really a recession. So once again, the narrative is changing as we stand here, you know? So let's go to the next one, because this becomes, I think, our big issue. We have to change the narrative. So here it says, we can't be in a survival mode. We must be in a growth mode. We can't be the victim. We have to be the victor. We have to decide that we're going to pay our bills on time. We're going to save money. We're going to work and increase our income. That we have to make those kinds of decisions to control how much we pay for the money that we borrow. Let's say, for example, looking here, although rates are significantly higher than last year, they're still historically low, remaining below 6%. So we just talked about how the average interest rate from 1971 to now is 7.7%. So even at 6% as a going rate, it's not a bad rate. But then look at this, Carl. A lot of builders are offering what they call buy downs. So that means, okay, the interest rate is 6%, but you can buy that interest rate down to 4%, to 3%, and still have a very good interest rate, even though the market is shifting. So let's say, for example, one strategy that I encourage buyers and sellers with. Most houses, later on, we'll talk about the appreciation that most houses have had over the past 2 years. And for example, in 2021, most people gained at least $64,000 in the value of their home. So the question becomes, did we participate in that $64,000? And then if you take your $64,000, it makes sense to sell. It makes sense to get that money out of the house and move to another house. So then the person might say, well, if I move, the next house is going to be priced even higher with their $64,000 built into it. So then what do? We make a good offer on a house. We take the money we made from the house we sold, we buy interest rate down. So now, even though we had a house with 3 or 4% interest rate, now we buy another house and we buy that interest rate down to 3 or 4%. So we're still in the same kind of marketplace. And then we take our additional capital, our additional equity, and we buy down the price of that house. So then we're in a position once again to take advantage of the marketplace. So let's go back to the 5 to 7 years of interest. This is mind blowing, Carl. On average, just imagine, don't move yet. I'm kind of scared. Just stay right there for now. On average, let's say in our community there in Hillwood, most of the people that live in that neighborhood have been there 30 years or more. And the housing prices have tripled, let's say, in 30 years. But let's take the same house built around the same time in a Meyerland area. And the difference is our houses in our neighborhoods turn over about every 20 to 25 years, 23 years to kind of be exact. So we've lived past the interest and writing the interest off from 7 years. And now we've spent 14 more years just paying house notes. And sure, now we've paid the house off, but we paid all that interest for those 14 years or those 20 years that someone else sold their house after 7 years, took their equity, and they moved on and bought another house. So our strategy in buying houses almost has to change. We have to understand that there's equity in the house, and that we had to buy the house, gain the equity, sell the house, and move to the next house.
I think we need more clarity on that, because you said, okay, you get value in the house. I think you said something like 64,000.
Right.
And we saying from, let's say the home was bought in 1980, and then over 20 years, you get, by the time of the year 2000, it's worth 64,000 more. Is that is what you're saying?
That's kind of what I'm saying. Let's say, for example, if we took, let's say before 2020 and 21, Houston would be averaging 3 to 5% increase in value every year. Now, your Californias and different places, California, New York, Florida, they might have been having 5, 10, 15% appreciation in their houses. But just imagine, we bought a house for 100,000, like I said, just make the number simple. And in 1980, 30 years later, it's appreciated in value 3 to 5% for 30 years. And so it goes from a $100,000 house to a $250,000 house. And so you could easily have the 64,000 in equity. You could easily have 100,000, 200,000. And of course, it depends on the house that you bought and how that house appreciated based on that area. So once again, everything is local. So the localized markets, whether it's Houston versus Dallas, whether it's Maryland versus Sunnyside, everything plays into to value, or plays into the equation based on location. Now, one thing about real estate they say is location, location, location. It really makes a difference.
Very much so.
Let's look at the next chart.
Okay.
And look at, you have right there, inflation versus mortgage rates. And so here we see, go back for me a little bit there.
Go up.
Yeah, right there.
Okay.
So here we see inflation versus mortgage rates. So current rates are about 5.5, inflation is about 9. And so they're saying that in order for inflation, and these are historical methods. And to me today, we're looking at unhistorical situations where you got world events going on, world economies, global economics happening. But the economists were first saying that when the inflation rate was about 7, they were saying interest rates needed to go to about 7 to balance out inflation. But inflation is continuing to grow. So now inflation is up to about 9, rates are about 5.5, and they're saying that interest rates for houses might have to get close to 9. But once they get to 9, as you see from yesterday going up yesterday, then they start dropping, because then once again, they use the interest rates to drive the marketplace. Just think, I read something last week that's saying that with credit cards, we've gone through a number of years where the credit card interest rates were low. And now they're saying the credit card interest rates are about to increase. And so we have to understand that, once again, it's the cost of money. How much does it cost the credit card companies to loan the money to you, and how much interest can they charge you on what you purchase? And that's just how they make money. It's a crazy game, but it is played. We just have to learn how to play the game. We can go to the next one. Now, and what I've tried to do is just kind of go over the various terms that we're hearing, that we hear the rumor mills, and talk about expectations and kind of what I see happening in the marketplace based on various experts that I'm following. So one thing we hear about is slow growth and how prices are going to drop. We're going to have this bubble, going to have the recession, all those kind of things. And they're saying historically that higher mortgage rates coupled with more inventory will lead to slower home price growth, but unlikely declines in home prices. So just think, we talked about how the housing stock in America is the average of 1974 house, and how because of that, we need to increase and build more and newer housing. So because we need to build more housing, we still have a supply issue. So pricing might not increase as fast as it has over the last 2 years, but it will continue to increase because there's limited stock available, houses available. I won't say stock, I'll say houses. So because of that, pricing will slow down as far as increases are concerned. Let's say when this year started, they were projecting that this year would probably see another 20% appreciation. Now those numbers have been adjusted, and they're still saying we're going to see 9 to 10% appreciation in the houses that are bought this year. So there's not going to be a bust, I don't believe. And from the experts that I'm following, it threw me off. The pricing will slow down, but it will continue to increase. Let's say, for example, one thing I see happening here in the Dallas area, talking with some of the builders here. Right now, they have roughly 45,000 new construction houses being built in Dallas right now. And the builders all understand everybody has product on the ground, but they also understand they're kind of in this thing together. And so from talking to a couple of different builders, they're saying that each company is watching each other. No one wants to drop pricing, but what they'll do is increase incentives. So over the past 2 to 3 weeks, almost every company that I'm dealing with is offering an incentive to buyers where they're giving you money towards closing costs. They're giving you money towards buy downs to buy your interest rate down, giving you money to lock in your interest rate if your house is being built over the next 6 to 9 months so that you can actually afford the house better than you could before, but they're not cutting anything off the price.
So let me ask this question.
Go ahead.
They have different developers that they start a community and then they offer people to come in. I guess you're talking about those incentives. The house is not built. You're waiting on the house to be built, but they trying to get your money locked in. Can you get real good advantages like that?
You can, because just imagine now, if you go into a situation, let's say, for example, 400,000, you sign a contract for 400,000 to buy the house, and two things have to work. Let's say what was happening last year. Last year, you might have a contract for 400,000 with a builder, and you had supply chain interruption and shortage of lumber, shortage of concrete, shortage of roofing, and how all those things now have kind of caught up, where last year builders didn't necessarily know their costs. So they had stipulations in the contract where if their costs increase, then they were going to pass that cost increase on to the buyer. So this year, supply chain is kind of under control, but of course you got the big strike going on in California now, and the barge is still out in the Pacific. So eventually they'll come back and say, we got supply chain issues again, as far as things being shipped. So, but now you could buy a house, and while it's being built, based on the market increasing in value, you could find yourself, by the time you get ready to close on your house, and it's already increased in value. So you've actually walked into a house, you paid for, your contract was 400, you paid 400, but now it's a $450,000 house while you were building it. And that's happened. And then you're able to turn around and sell it if you had to and not lose money. Because people are still being transferred to various jobs. People are still looking and finding jobs and being relocated. So you always want to try and buy right so that you have the flexibility to move if you need to or want to. So then we talked about the slow growth there. The next we talk about, just kind of what you hear sometimes is the market correction. And here it says that home prices are still appreciating. That's why this is not a housing market correction. A correction is a sustained decline in the value of market index or the price of an individual asset. A correction is generally agreed to be a 10% to 20% drop in value from a recent peak. So we haven't had those kinds of drops. So there's not a market correction going on. So we can sit on the sideline. Could just think of all the people that sat on the sideline and didn't participate in the average of $64,000 in equity growing in your house. That now that it's going to slow down to a 3 to 5% increase in appreciation, you missed out on that $64,000. So we can sit on the sideline and not be aggressive based on the rumors, but housing value is going to increase. We can go to the next slide. All right, so there's that $64,000 average equity gained over the past year there.
So you saying how, you said there was like over 20 years that you might earn 64,000. Has that increased, or is that, I can see that, but.
So depending on where the house is located, depending on like location. So in some neighborhoods, the houses have gone from 400 to 800 over the past 2 years. 64,000 is the average. I saw a house the other day, man, when I first got here to Dallas, I went and looked at this house. It was a 3-story townhome downtown Dallas. It was $700,000. I saw the same house for sale this week for $1.2 million. So that house increased $500,000 in the past 3 years since I've been here. So it's location. Should I rent or should I buy? I am a firm believer in buying. I think spending money on renting is a waste of money. You're buying a house for the landlord versus for yourself. There are no tax incentives for renting a house, where if you're buying, you got tax incentives. You can write off your property taxes. You can write off your mortgage interest. And just the pride of ownership and just having your own home, being able to do what you want, paint the walls any color you want to, and just really enjoy your home and limit the noise that you hear from your neighbors if you're in an apartment or a condo or so, and just enjoying home ownership. So I'm a firm believer in buying versus renting. Now, one thing I learned.
If I can speak for the people who are in the position of renting, there's a lot of reasons, and maybe if you comment on the reasons as I share. Okay, the first one is they don't know how to play the credit game. I know I didn't know how to play the credit game, or it was at a point where I thought it couldn't be fixed and so forth. I didn't see paying money to an institution for a service or product I didn't have anymore, and then going back and paying that. However, I have found that it's not that hard to fix your credit. So people have to be a little bit more aware that you can fix your credit. It's just a few things that you have to do. That's one thing. And then the second thing is the beginning and ending costs. From what I see, to have a decent home, you really need to have about $12,000, because you got to have the escrow money, inspection, appraisal. You have to have all of that. And then according to who you're getting the loan from, you might have to have money on the back end, because you got to pay for the right to get the loan to a certain extent. I may be saying it wrong, but for myself, if I want a home for $200,000, I might need to have $12,000 at least to make sure I can close on it. If you'll comment on those things.
So I usually use a factor of 10%, meaning that if I'm buying a $200,000 house, then I'm going to almost need 10%, $20,000 to buy that house. And that would include my 3 to 5 to 10% down payment. And then that would include my closing costs. which would be my title policy, my lender fees, as you made mention of, the property taxes, the insurance, the various closing costs that are involved in the purchase of the house. So that's one thing where I'm talking about changing our mindset, that you don't get to necessarily walk into a house and not have a combination of good credit and good cash. Let's say, for example, you have VA loans for veterans. You have USDA loans in the rural areas where you can actually get 100% loan, where you can buy a house and not pay anything down. But those credit criteria might be higher than where you're paying 3%, 5% down. Or you get 100% FHA loan and now your interest rate is higher. So it's always that pay me now, pay me later situation. And the best thing to do is to control our credit, take control of our credit, and have savings.
But even with 100% down, don't you still need to have a certain amount of cash to make sure you close?
Yeah, your closing costs, 100% loan means that the loan is 100%. You still have the closing costs that are involved, which could be your 4 to 10%. Average closing costs going to be about 4%. So you can eliminate your down payment, but you're still going to need your closing costs. And depending on the type of loan, depending on if you have some seller incentives where the seller might pay some of your closing costs. I mean, there are situations where people will walk away with the check at closing. And sometimes that's based on your earnest money minus your closing costs and still having extra cash available. It could be some incentives from the seller and or from the lender. I mean, some lenders will give you cash back based on the price of your loan. So
I have
they lender
seen
price.
that there are less incentives coming from the lender or the developer side in this economy because it's a hard to buy a good home economy. And there's so many bids out there that you really got to have the right package to be able to purchase the home. But it's still the goal.
Now, home ownership should be everyone's goal, even if it's a temporary goal, meaning that you buy now and I think about, Carl, back in I want to say the 90s, there was a big move in the 90s. You see articles about it where they were saying to move up in the company, you have to be ready and prepared to get transferred, to get relocated, and that it was easier to be relocated if you were renting versus if you were buying. And a lot of people bought into that and said, okay, well, I'm gonna move up with the company. I'm gonna move every year to 2 years and I'm gonna constantly rent and never develop any equity and constantly acting as a renter, even though you're making 100,000 or more per year. So we have to watch and control our own narratives and watch what we're reading and understand it. Here we talk about the median rents and how rents have increased on an average of 8 to 10% every year. Over the past 2 years, rents have gone up as high as 20%. So, and this is interesting too. So I'm following this guy out of California that's talking about the economy. And one thing they're saying is that as long as rents are increasing, there's no reason for housing costs to decrease, because now it's becoming so expensive to rent that people are choosing to pay a higher interest rate, put more money down to buy a house versus renting. I mean, you can look at rents now, 24. I mean, I'm working with a guy right now. His budget is $3,500 a month for rent. But he has credit issues.
Yeah.
So, and so what I then encourage person to do is we don't have to necessarily max out our rent. We can get, a less expensive house to rent and really max out our credit and start paying down on our credit, getting rid of some debt and increase our savings. one thing I'll talk about later on is we have to cancel the culture. A lot of what we do is keeping up with the Joneses, keeping up with the culture, which will control our housing costs because we want to live in a certain neighborhood. We want to drive a certain car. We want to wear certain clothes, and all that costs money. And a lot of times, based on that money that we're spending, we can't afford home ownership. It's interesting. I saw Cam Newton in an interview this week. Don't know what radio show he was on. But Cam Newton asked the question. He said, what do you think is the percentage of rappers that own houses? And the host said, 100%. And Cam was like, no, that's not close to that. So many of the rappers actually renting houses. They're renting lifestyles. And rents can be, we might think $1,800, $2,400 a month is high, but you got people paying $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a month in rent because that's the lifestyle that they want. And they have that kind of money to spend. But let's say if you can afford $30,000 a month in rent, but you find you a $2,000, $3,000 house and you save $17,000 a month, how soon can you buy a house? So we have to change our mindset in how we think about living, and we have to cancel the culture as far as, just the objective of living in the culture. Let's go to the next page.
Well, as we go to the next page, I just want to say, as a person with kids and who are part of this me culture, it's a difficult thing, especially when the larger Western community has really put an imprint on what is good, what is bad. And so we want to, those things that we are seeing and they have promoted to us, live in a certain neighborhood, drive a certain car. But as I try to tell my daughters, foundation is everything. If you can have a foundation, and ownership is a beginning of the foundation, that could take care of everything. It may take longer, but it's more substance to own it as opposed to just showing off for a little while.
Right.
That's a bigger thing. And I would love for more of our young people to look at life like that, especially my daughters and my kids.
Right. I know the owner of my company talked about being out at an event and meeting some 21, 22, 23, 24, 25-year-olds that had good jobs, making good money, that talked about they were still living at home, saving their money, and for future home ownership. Where sometimes we're in a rush to get out of the house, or sometimes the parents in a rush to get children out of the house. And we have to understand that during that time period, that's a time that you could actually save money and prepare yourself with a foundation for the future. I used to teach about, as a young adult, if you go to your parents and say, hey, I'm going to pay this much amount in rent every month, and instead of going out and getting an apartment, I said, then if you do that, then I'll go talk to your parents to say, hey, if your child is paying this much a month in rent and you don't need it, it's just extra money because you're living okay yourself, then let's save this money. And when your child gets ready to leave home, now they're ready to buy a house, buy a car, whatever they're ready to buy, and you've saved the rent money that they've been paying you that you didn't need. And now just think of the gifting you're able to give them to start life and the foundation you've been able to give them. We look at other neighborhoods and how other people are living, and that's what they're doing. The kids are at home longer, and the parents are able to invest in the kids to help them start life off. You think about, going to college and different things, and people that you graduate with, and how, you look up and you graduate in college trying to get you a used car, and you got other people graduating college and they're getting a brand new car. And it's like, okay, we both got the same job, working at the same company, making the same kind of money, but you had some assistance where I didn't. So we have to change our mindset, even in raising our kids and helping develop that foundation. We got to change it to the point where it is creating wealth and leaving a legacy for our children's children. It's possible. So we've kind of gone over the rent stats. Next, we'll look at the how expensive home ownership. Home ownership is cheaper than rent. And the next one we talked about firing our landlords. No more landlords. Now, of course, I say that, and I've been a landlord in the past, so I enjoyed rents. But as a renter, we should not enjoy paying rent. And the next step talks about you're buying a house. Either you're buying it for yourself or you're buying it for the landlord. The next one says that if you are waiting for the right time is now. And then the next one says that you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. So we have to change our mindset. We got to prepare to be homeowners. Here's some stats that came out from a study that was done of Black millionaires. It said wealthy Black people believe that they create their life. The poor believe that life happens. Millionaire mindset, the smartest money move. The first one was home ownership. Number 2 was reducing their debt. Millionaire mindset, their credit card debt is $2,500 or less, where some of us got $2,500 or more on every credit card that we have. Then credit bureau. So if you want to increase our credit, so let's say you got a credit card with $1,000 limit. The max you want to have on that card to increase your credit scores is $300. We don't want to have $900 on there. We don't have $700 on there. $300 or 30% of your credit card utilization is where your credit scores start increasing. So if you got a $1,500 card, the max you want to have on there is $500. So 30%, whatever your credit card is, that limit, 30% of that is the utilization that you want to use. You want to use less than that. Once again, we talked about creating wealth and leaving a legacy for our children's children. And this is good right here. It says, income is our most powerful tool. So we have to manage our income and manage our outgoing. The next chart talks about how it's not your fault. You just didn't have the right tools. As I stated, this is something that's in our being, that's been here from the very beginning of life, and something that we have to change and overcome. And then the next one talks about when you think about giving up, think about how far you've come. And then the next one is that number 1 tool. Mine out of order that call. So the number 1 tool, you good. I just move the sheet around. Is a budget. Go up a little bit more. So we got to have a plan for our money. We got to allocate our money. We have to live below our means, and we got to unplug the culture, because the culture will have you living above your means. We got to reduce our debt. The rich are rich because they act poor, and the poor are poor because they act rich. So we got to flip the script. And in flipping the script, we got to save and invest. We got to pay ourselves first. We got to build an emergency fund. They suggest emergency fund is 6 months of savings. So 6 months of your net income, you should have saved in the bank. Then you got to consistently invest. Got to be creative. So if that means I got to move back home with my parents, if that means I got to move in with a friend. So it's 2 of us and we get a house together, we're renting a house together, we're cutting our expenses in half so that we can both save half and so that we can both buy a house in the future. I mean, I had a couple of clients in Houston that had one guy that had a house. He rented a room out to all of his friends. I had a young lady, she had done the same thing. And basically what happened was all those friends that were living in the houses were saving their money and eventually became homeowners. So we got to learn how to be creative in saving our money and using our money. And then the next one talks about, okay, that's the one we just went over. When you think about giving up, think about how far you've come. And the next one starts talking about your tips for home search. So the first thing we got to work on in becoming a homeowner is getting pre-approved for a mortgage. So we want to go to the mortgage company, talk to the mortgage company, find out what do I need to do to get approved to become a homeowner. Look at my credit report and have them do a credit analysis for me to tell me what can I do to change my scores and do what's called now a credit rescoring. Now, I don't want to take anybody's money away, but the credit repair companies, a lot of times if we did the research, we could do that ourselves. We could understand exactly what, we could write those same letters that they're writing. We could do the same things that they're doing if we learn it. If that means it's a trip to the bookstore, if that means it's a trip to Google, or if that means it's just a little research, and we can understand how to correct our own credit and not pay somebody $50 a month, $99 a month, whatever that number is. And we take control and we start saving that money, that $49.99 or that $99.99, we start saving that. And that's a part of our investing. And we pay off our own credit. You know, I had a client recently that kind of, gave an attorney a lump sum of money to pay off credit. And they didn't use letters. They just paid all his credit off and he ended up with some derogatory statements on his credit report, even though he had paid all this stuff off. I said, man, you should have had letters that said paid as agreed. It should have been negotiated. It's one thing to just kind of hand the money over to the credit repair companies and then they just pay it. But nothing should have come out derogatory if you paid a lump sum of money to have credit repaired. But that can happen. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. And then that would be it, Carl. If we have any more questions, or if you have any more questions, here to answer any and all questions.
I just wanted to say what you talked about number 2 on here, which is the credit score. It's very doable. I just want to say I turned mine around. I didn't think it was possible, but I turned mine around. I paid my credit cards. I went down to about, as you said, I think it was 30%. And then I got a Experian, which you don't have to have, but it helped me. But I'm not suggesting that because you can do it yourself, just as Darryl said, and manage your credit cards, keep a savings or an emergency fund to be able to manage different things that come up, and it can be done. And the main thing is don't be late on payments. Don't be late on payments and just keep staying steady and it'll increase your score. So
and pay more
mine is about, and I'm not an expert, mine's about 660 last I looked, but before I started looking for a house, it was about 530. So I've made a lot of improvement and still working on it, thanks to my friends and different things. So thank you, Darryl.
Thank you,
let me
Carl.
see if we have any more comments on Facebook or anything of that nature. We thank that sister Teresa Hawkins Spates for her comment. Let me see if we have any more. Well, we don't have any more at this time. It's been a very informative show. Darryl, you have a final word?
Just Darrly Malloy with DOS here in the DFW area, providing a 3D real estate experience. Of course, I'm from the Houston area and still work in the Houston area as well. So if I can help anyone, and I'm, sometimes I kick myself because I do provide lots of information. I believe that the best client is an informed, educated, and empowered client. And I believe in empowering clients. And even if that means I don't necessarily always make money in discussing things with someone, but if you're empowered to become a homeowner, then I'm excited about it. So
do you
Darrly
have
Malloy,
a website, phone number, anything for somebody who's watching the show and wants to contact you immediately as we get off?
immediately, 469 649-6274. Darrly Malloy webpage, www.darrylmalloy.realtor, Realtor. That's my website. You can also contact me on email at darrly@dosspros.com. I'm
Darrell, I
here to
ask
serve.
that you put in the group chat on Facebook,
Okay.
in the chat from the show, put in
Yeah.
those things so that if
Okay.
they want to reach you, put that in the Facebook chat so that they can contact you and they
Okay.
will be able to ask you the questions that they need to get their home as soon as they can.
Right. Tell me this. Should I do the same thing in Zoom? Is Zoom being recorded as well?
Zoom is being recorded, but once we go off, they won't have access to it. They will have access to Facebook.
Facebook. All right.
All right. So we're at the end of our episode. I want to say thank you, Darrell. I want to say thank you to everybody in the audience. And Darrly Malloy, contact him. And if you want to buy a home and buy it now, or you take a little time to talk to him about it and get prepared, you can do both of those things with Darrly Malloy Real Estate, and talk to him and get your home and get set up for your foundation. And thank you very much. And we are going to finish up today, and we look forward to your comments. Send them on Facebook and talk to Darrell as soon as possible so that you can be comfortable and knowledgeable, and as he says, empowered to buy your home. Thank you very much. We are out.